Step right up, folks. You are now entering It's a Circus, where motherhood, womanhood, and self-care aren't always a show-stopping act, but they're certainly entertaining. I'm your host, Elsa, here to prove that no one really knows what they're doing, and that's perfectly fine. Let's have some real conversations, peel back the layers, and remind you that you're never alone in this season of becoming. Let's get the show rolling. Okay, we are officially in season 5 of It's a Circus Podcast. And I could just not be more excited to be kicking off our first interview of the season with Alicia. She has an incredible IVF story. And I sat on the edge of my seat the entire conversation, and she really takes you there. She takes you there through her timeline. She takes you there through her emotions, where she's at, what was the most challenging. It is an absolutely beautiful story. And I think the depth of her journey is one that I still am kind of reeling from, and because she was able to describe so many things in such great detail. So it's a beautiful way to kick off this story, and just another wonderful reminder of how important it is to share and to be honest and open. Without further ado, here's Alicia. Oh my gosh, welcome to It's a Circus Podcast. We have been chatting, so just FYI, everyone, I had to quickly hit record as soon as possible because I don't want to miss a single sentence, word, or breath from you. But I kick us off with this question is, who are you a mom of? How long have you been a mama for? And have you always wanted to be a mom?
I definitely should have got my tissue ready.
I know.
So my son's name is Andreas. He just turned 2 in December. And I definitely knew I always wanted to be a mom eventually. Like when I turned 30, I didn't have this oh my God, there's a timeline and I have to get on it. And I didn't really feel this urge that my biological clock was ticking until it was. And I think that that's when my reality set in, that this was not going to be an easy task or an easy journey, or I just wasn't going to be one of these girls that was like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Like I knew it was going to be difficult kind of early. So I think that made me want it even more, if that makes sense.
Okay. So tell us, how was he a surprise or was he planned?
No, he was 100%. We knew via IVF.
Yeah.
We knew the sex of him. I knew how many embryos I had, the sex of all of them, or 4 of them, which we'll kind of talk about more. But yeah, he was definitely not planned. It was a journey to get to him. And it was something that, as difficult as it was, as much grief as not only that I went through, my husband went through, and too, like our family went through, it was the greatest blessing that could have ever happened to me. And I know that he is 100% a miracle. Like if there wasn't the science and the technology of IVF and these amazing doctors and surgeons, my son would not be here. Like I 100% know that for a fact.
Makes me want to cry because
Yeah.
full disclosure, we live in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I get to see
Yeah.
your absolutely gorgeous, beautiful perfection of a son every single day.
Running these streets, acting wild, like as if he's 15.
He thinks he's 15. Yeah, he's like 2
Yeah.
going on 15. No, like crushing it. And it is amazing to think that he is truly like a walking wild tornado of a miracle. So
100%. Thank you.
yes. So IVF, I would say I'm very unfamiliar. I do know people from afar that have like gone through the journey. But I haven't had the opportunity to talk to anybody. So I am just so thrilled that you agreed to share some of the details on here. So thank you. And
Of
anyone
course.
listening who may know of or are also going through this journey, I think this is like such an important story to share. So, can you take us back to the beginning when all of a sudden your biological clock is like, tink, 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 time for a baby?
Yes. Yes. So when I first started this journey, I wasn't 100% sure I was going to share it, but kind of like what you're saying, I didn't know anybody. Like none of my friends had gone through IVF. I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna go through this alone. This is super scary. It's a very unknown situation, like, shots are involved," and there's, like, tons of red flags going off in your head, and I thought to myself, "Maybe I should, like, share my story on Instagram and see if I get any feedback," and I randomly just, like, posted that me and my husband were gonna start this IVG like, kind of like a casually post, like, I wasn't going into detail, and I'm not kidding you, I had never in a million years thought what I posted was gonna turn into what it did. And I had people reaching out to me that I went to high school with, people that I worked with that I didn't even know went through IVF and were like, "Oh my god, I'm here to totally talk you through this. You can do this." It was a very supportive community right away for me, and that was kind of like the light bulb that went off, that I felt comfortable that I had to share this story because there's so many women that are probably going through the same thing I am and just don't talk about it. They're scared to talk about it. They don't want the shame behind it. What if it doesn't work? There's a lot of what ifs going into IVF. So I think for me, turning something into that was so scary that I started to feel more and more comfortable was easier for me to continue to share my story, if that made sense.
Yes.
So we basically started trying to get pregnant naturally in 2019. We heard all the things from all the families. Oh my god, you need to go on a vacation. You need to not think about it. This is gonna happen when it's gonna happen. And I probably legit heard
My
that
God.
for, like, a year. And I was like, "Okay, well, nothing's happening."
Right.
So, then we just decided to go to my regular OB. We were like, "Hey, listen, I got off birth control. Nothing's happening. What is the deal?" They were like, "Well, kind of like the next step, once you get off of birth control, if you're not pregnant within 6 months, we can put you on Clomid." Had never heard of it. I was like, "What the hell is this? What is this gonna do?" I basically lived on Google every single day. So I did Clomid until like 2020. Um, well, at the beginning of 2020. And then of course, during that time of starting to do Clomid, there was a lot of other testing that you kind of have to do just to kind of tiptoe into the next steps if it were to be IVF. My husband had to go through a lot of testing.
Yeah. I
I
was
had to
just
go
going to
through a
ask
lot
you.
of testing.
Hmm.
They check your tubes, they check your,
Wow.
the blood flow. And all of this is like right when the pandemic started happening.
Of course.
And we were like, is this something we should move forward with? Like the world is shutting down. Should we be trying to have a baby right now? Like there were a lot of kind of up in the air questions that we had, but we also knew I'm not getting pregnant. So we should probably continue moving forward just in case of the what if. And so I basically did Clomid for like 6 months. And all that does is kind of like force you into this like extreme ovulation, is what they call it. Yeah, she did not work for her sister.
Oh, no.
So yeah, so I did that for like I think it was like 6 months. And again, nothing happened. at that point, my OB doctor was like, listen, like, this is all I can really do. You at this point need to move forward with, a fertility doctor. And she had recommended somebody. We were living in Orlando at the time. And we didn't really think that IVF was even on the table at that point. So we were like, let's just call this IVF, or let's just call this fertility doctor and see what they say. Again, this was like at the height of the pandemic. So we call and we're like, hey, we've been trying naturally for a year. We've done Clomid for 6 months. They're like, okay, the next step for you would be IUI, artificial insemination. But because we were in the heart of the pandemic, they were kind of like, there's only so much we can do. Like, we're only taking so many patients at a time. You kind of have to wait in your car and then come in for your appointment and come in whenever it's your turn for your IUI transfer. And we were like, okay, full on mask. Like, it was a very scary situation to be in. So just long story short, we did 3 IUIs starting in August of 2020. Yes. And that's kind of just like a very mild, there's not a lot of medications involved. It's just a very simple, like, you're going off of your natural ovulation cycle and your natural period. So again, we didn't really get a lot of information of what was going on, probably because of the pandemic. They weren't able to bring us into the office, sit us down. This is what's going on. So we were just kind of, whatever they were telling us over the phone call or a Zoom call, that's all the information we had. And they were
okay, so I have to ask you, because at this point you started in 2019 and you're like deep in 2020, you're starting IUIs in August. What is your mental state? What is your marriage happening? Does your husband have any thoughts on this? Like, what are
I
you
think
guys at like right now?
Yeah, at this point we were just kind of like in shock.
Yeah.
We were just like, are we really getting ready to do this in the middle of the pandemic? I mean, my husband was at that point like kind of furloughed. I was, casually working here and there, just depending on, what the CDC was saying. So we were paying for a lot of this out of pocket because insurance at this point, the type of insurance we had did not cover anything.
Yeah.
So we were starting to kind of realize that, hey, listen, we're already X amount of dollars in and we're getting no answers of why this isn't working, how long this is going to take, what are we going to do next? So I think we were just so naive to the process at that point that we didn't know what to think. We didn't know why it was working. They weren't telling us. So we didn't really have anything to go off of other than we knew we wanted a baby and it wasn't working for us. So there was a lot of sadness, I think, but my husband and I really hadn't experienced that in our marriage yet before. So I think we were just kind of riding the wave, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we knew we wanted to continue to move forward, but didn't know what was next for us. Like, we were starting to get nervous, I guess, but at the same time, we knew we wanted it.
Were you talking and sharing this with your families, or were you?
At this point, very minimum. Like, I think I had told my mom, like, hey, we're doing IUI. And of course, bless their souls, of that generation, honey. They were just so confused. It was like very foreign to them. So I think for me, definitely for my husband and his family, because I think culturally, it was best for him not to say anything because they were so confused. I think for me, obviously going through it, I wanted to just tell my mom because I was starting to get frustrated. I was, confused as well.
Yeah.
And, there's only so much you can say, you know what I mean? And I think we kind of held back a little bit because we didn't want to share too much information because we didn't really know either.
Totally.
So, right. So at that point, we just knew after the third failed IUI, some women decide to do. I met girls that were doing like 6 and 7 IUIs, and I was like, God bless you, because it is definitely a much cheaper, affordable, less meds, less hormones way to approach getting pregnant when there is infertility issues. But for me, I think I had a gut feeling that this was a waste of our time.
Sure.
And I was just like, until now that we're realizing that we're kind of in this like cycle of nothing's moving forward, I'm ready to start figuring out why.
Yes.
And at the time, that doctor wasn't giving us those answers. So maybe it was because of the pandemic. I'm not really sure. So at that point, I decided to leave that fertility clinic. Again, Florida at the time was not really doing a lot of infertility procedures because of the pandemic. It wasn't considered a priority. So I got online and literally, I'm pretty sure I like Googled, and this was before ChatGPT, girl. I lived on Google for days. Like I mean, I wasn't really, we weren't really working.
Right.
So we would live on Google for days, and I would get on Instagram and I would DM like as many girls as possible. And I found out that the state of New York was still looking at IVF as, I forget the word I need to use, but it was still looking at IVF as like something that needed to happen. Like they weren't putting it on the back burner. Girls were still able to go and do IVF transfers. So that's when I knew. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right. And I found one of the best IVF doctors in the country. She had this amazing following on social media, and I started reaching out to some of her followers. I started getting feedback from them. And I kind of like started making friends with like these girls in New York, New Jersey. And I was like, okay, we're going to do this. Like, I'm going to reach out to this IVF doctor via DM, girl.
Wow. I love it.
I'm sure she thought I was insane. I didn't really think much was going to happen of it, again, because of the pandemic. And literally within probably 4 hours, I had one of her medical assistants reach out to me via DM and was like, we would love to hear more about what you're going through. We know you're in Florida. Can we set up an appointment with you with Dr. Luke? And I was like, yes, I'm available today at 5:00.
Totally.
Please. So that was on like January 21st, like January 2021 is when that was, the beginning of January. And I was like, okay, we met with her via Zoom. We met with one of her assistants. She kind of told us, what this was going to look like, what she thought my issue was. It was kind of like a brief consultation. I was able to fly to New York with like a medical clearance.
Gosh.
Yeah. So we started IVF February 20th. So I met with her January, I think it was like January 11th or something like that. January 11th. And I did my first shot of IVF on February 20th in New York. We had flew to New York that day. I went to the clinic. New York at the time was a club. Like, it was so scary. Like, there was no one around. We were having to get COVID tested every 3 days to come into her office. You could not really leave. We were in a hotel. We could not really leave our hotel just to like do anything. Like no restaurants were open. It was very scary. We were, I think, one of like maybe 8 people on the flight. Like people are like, "Wait, you're flying to New York in the middle of this pandemic?" And I knew it sounded delusional, like what we were doing. I knew it sounded delusional. I knew people were like, "She's on another level. She's not thinking right." Like people did not know what to say to us because it was so foreign of what we were doing.
Yeah.
As far as family was concerned.
Right.
So we were there February 20th. I was going into the clinic, you know, every 3 to 4 days. I was doing blood draws. I was doing ultrasounds. They were, you know, looking at your follicles, seeing how I was responding to the meds. I started to respond kind of slowly. So they had to start, you know, upping your dose. That's when you really start feeling like shit. The headaches, the migraines, the bloat, you know. So the now thought of like I'm going through this was really starting to hit. And two, on top of it, like my husband was slowly going back to work. So he was working from the hotel. He was giving me my shots morning and night. I was just feeling awful. It was basically in this hotel room, living on social media, learning from other IVF girls what was going to be next for me, what could I expect, because I didn't know. You know, I was really blinded. I didn't have any friends that were going through this. I only knew women off of social media to give me some type of idea of what was next. So I had to do the meds for a lot longer than normal. I did them for like 14 days and then 14, 15 days, I think. On March 6th is when I had my retrieval. So that's when they go in, you are under anesthesia. They retrieve the eggs that you had grown. You know, they retrieve the ones that grow to a certain size that they feel are able to be fertilized. So I have my little cheat sheets here because she does not remember. It was so long ago. So I retrieved 11 eggs, and 10 of them fertilized with sperm. And then at that point, once you have those eggs, they kind of, you have the decision if you want to do a fresh transfer or a frozen transfer. We knew that we wanted to freeze freeze the embryos we had and send them to testing. So at that point, if you send your eggs to testing, you are looking at, you know, if there's any unhealthy, meaning if there's, they can actually test them for Down syndrome or like you can test for cancer if that runs in either side of your family. You know, just to make sure that they're healthful, viable eggs to transfer. You can also know the sex of your embryos at that point if you chose to. And so we sent, I think it was like 8 eggs or something that they felt were healthy enough to transfer. So they essentially, what they do is when they're frozen, they kind of almost like slice a little bit of the cells off and they send them to a special lab, and that lab is able to tell them all of that information. But that period is a 2-week wait period. And for me, in the IVF journey, this is when it became very difficult.
Tell us
I
about that.
think the physical part for me, meaning the shots, the bloat, the headaches, you know, the uncomfortableness, the physical part of IVF, I was able to, out of sight, out of mind. I was able to put my head down. I can do this, no problem. The mental part, is when I realized this was something I had never experienced before. I think it became so heavy at that point that is when I started really crumbling. What if I sent these 5 eggs off and they call me and are like, "Hey, listen, unfortunately, they were not healthy for you to transfer," because that happens. Like, I had women reach out to me with that scenario. And that's when I really started to spiral and realize this is not 100% guarantee. I don't know if we just spent this insane amount of money to get these 4 eggs, 5 eggs, if this is something that's going to work for us. Did I just go through this for nothing? So that 2 weeks was the hardest for me. That first waiting period was very challenging for me. I think that's when I started to really grasp what IVF was. And everybody has such a different journey because I had a lot of women reaching out to me with so many different scenarios. So I think within that 2 weeks, I wouldn't say I had an aha moment, but I definitely realized this might not work for me. Does that make sense?
So crazy.
So also during this point in April, um, we had found out that my husband actually got a promotion, that we were gonna be moving here to Sarasota, and of course, we were so excited. I had grown up coming to Sarasota. I was like, "Sure, we're gonna go buy a house and live our beach life. No problem." Like, we never second guessed ourselves. Like, we knew we wanted to be here. Was it a lot earlier than what we were expecting? Sure. But we were like, "Let's just make it happen." So we purchased our house. Of course, we built the house, and during that time, I had found out from my IVF doctor that during my retrieval, I had, like, an insane amount of high blood pressure. So, during my retrieval, my blood pressure was something wild. It was, like, 170 over 140. They thought she was full on having a heart attack
Of
during her
course.
retrieval, girl.
Yeah.
So, and I never knew any of this prior to that. Was kind of like my first time going under anesthesia for the egg retrieval. So, I didn't really know how I was gonna respond, know what was gonna happen. So, my doctor let me know, it was through a phone call, that I was not gonna be able to move forward with my, transfer, my first transfer, because she wanted me to get a medical clearance from a cardiologist just to make just to make sure that I wasn't, like, on the verge of, like, having a heart attack
Oh
at
my
I think
gosh.
I think I was, like, 35 years old at the time. And I was like, "What?" I was like I literally thought, like, this was a joke. I was like, "What the hell does, like, my blood pressure have to do with me doing a transfer?" Like, at the time, you don't really think, "Oh, okay, well, if that transfer works and I get pregnant and then I have this high blood pressure," you don't really think like that. So, I really started having to, like, jump through insane amount of hoops is what it felt like. I had to find a cardiologist that was willing to take me at 35 years old, going through IVF, letting them know my scenario. I mean, most cardiologists, when you call at 35 years old, think you're a delulu.
Yeah.
And I had to explain my whole scenario and what I needed, that I needed a medical clearance from them to be able to move forward with the rest of my IVF journey. And it was pretty intense for about, I think it was like 3 months or something like that, like maybe 2 months, I was doing, um, stress tests. I had to sleep with this heart rate on.
Huh.
Or this heart monitor on. I had to do ultrasounds of the heart. I was really being put, like, through the ringer.
As you're
And
moving too, right?
yeah, as we're building this house, we're driving
Right.
to and from Sarasota,
Oh
like,
my
you know,
gosh.
checking on the process of the house, also trying to sell our house that was in Orlando. So it was a lot of things at once, but I think I stayed so focused on I had to do whatever I needed to do to have this perfect transfer. And, on top of it, they tell you, oh, what's really important is to try to keep your stress level down. Well, that's a joke. Like like literally, I wanted to laugh in these doctors' face when they were like, well, a lot of this can be controlled by your stress level. Okay, let's take a seat because that's like not reality.
Yeah.
Um, so once I did get the medical clearance, like I said, I think it was in like May. Yeah, like May of 2021. Like I said, I think the weight of IVF really started to take a toll at that point because mentally we were going through it. I was really starting to feel it physically. Financially, we were really starting to feel it because, again, we were still paying for all IVF out of pocket, meaning meds, the flights, the hotels, the procedures.
God.
Nothing was covered,
Yeah.
nothing. So we were really starting to notice, okay, we're slowly going through whatever savings we have, like it's starting to tap
Yep.
at that point. And we hadn't even got to our first transfer. And each transfer, I think at the time, I can't even remember, but I think it was anywhere from like, including the meds, it was like $5,000 to do a transfer. So, and again, including the flight, the hotel, the whole thing. So finally, we get to the point where I can transfer. It was June of 2021. We are over the moon. We are like, this is happening. We knew we wanted to we had at that point, we knew we had one girl and three boys.
Okay.
I knew at that point, I was like, oh no, she's gonna be a girl mom. We are gonna paint walls from pink walls, and it's gonna be rainbows and butterflies. We did that first transfer and May of 21 and it failed July 2nd. So
Gotcha.
at that point, again, I knew like my dream and the vision I had for my life of being a girl mom was no longer going to exist for me. So it was the first time I think myself and my husband together as husband and wife had experienced real grief. I think it was something that we were not prepared for, even though people were telling us, hey, this isn't guaranteed. You have to go into it with an open mind. And we did. We did try to, I guess you can say, keep our emotions very at bay going into the transfer. But it's very hard. It's very hard because when you're in the transfer room, they're showing you the embryo going into your uterus. My husband's right there. It's a very emotional experience. They're showing you where they're implanting the embryo, where the embryo has landed. This looks great. You're hearing all of these positive things that day. And we left New York with this mindset that, hey, we're going to go back to Florida and I'm pregnant and we're going to move on with our lives. And when you get that first "you're not pregnant" call, you literally feel like your whole world kind of collapses, and you don't really experience that type of grief until that moment. Like, I think it's a different type of grief because it is something that you want so much and something that we have worked so hard to get to that point, and it's just over like that in like a 30-second phone call. It was over. And you just hang up the phone and you're like, "Okay, I guess I'll go back to work." Like, what am I supposed to do with myself now? You don't think, "Okay, I'm gonna get back on the horse and do this next month. Next cycle, I'm gonna be completely fine to do this." You don't think like that in the moment.
My God.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Um, so and again, I think for us, we really kind of wanted to process and make sure that this is what we wanted, because again, we didn't know that this transfer wasn't gonna work and that we were going to now have to come back to the drawing board financially, emotionally, physically, that I was gonna have to put my body through that again. That the meds were gonna be that much more intense for the second time. That we had to explain to our family that this didn't work. That I put on social media that my transfer had failed, and I I think for me that that was kind of also what helped to heal me, because your family and your friends, they don't know what to say. They don't know how to respond. They don't have the words to be able to talk to you.
Right, right.
And I think the women on social media did have the words for me. They were able to support me. They were able to explain, this is what IVF is. As hard as what that was for me to hear, that's the reality we were living. And I think that's what was key for me, is knowing that these women had been there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they say, and it was someone on social media that told me each transfer is a learning curve. And that was so scary to hear, but so real at the same time. I knew, yeah, my doctor had learned a little bit about this transfer that failed, but at the same time, does that mean I'm gonna go through all of these embryos and nothing's gonna work and they're just gonna keep learning? Like, am I an experiment at this point? Like, that's what you feel like.
Yeah.
Because up until this point, I only had unexplained infertility. Nobody knew why this transfer didn't work for me. I had perfectly graded embryos. I had, a great uterus. I was not 40 yet. I was able to carry. They knew I was able to carry, that it wasn't, a male factor. We didn't have anything that was able to tell us why this didn't work. So you're left with that type of frustration as well as grief. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry because obviously I'm right along with you in that story. And woof, that feels
Yeah.
like a lot because it's not
Yes.
only your personal grief, it's like, it's also obviously your partner's going through their own thing that's also like challenging. And then I can't imagine the pressures that put on
Yes.
yourself because you're just like, oh,
Yeah.
well, they're telling me these good things. This part is good. This part is good. This
And,
part
like,
is good.
why isn't it working for me?
How freaking psycho.
Yes, it was wild. And two, we had the pressure. I think I had like the emotional pressure, the physical pressure of it, but my husband, he kind of felt like he had the financial pressure of it. He felt like because he was the only
Yes.
one working at that
Oh,
time,
man.
and he knew that I was not going to give up. Like I was not going to give up easy. Like you were going to have to tell me like, listen, girl, it's a hard no for you. Like literally a doctor was going to have to tell me that to my face before I was going to give up. And I think the financial pressure really started getting to him because, we were now in this new house, which again, we built this house, big house to have kids. Like we thought we were building this two-story house because we were going to have kids. And I was like, well, we didn't just move into this big house and built this big fabulous house for the both of us to like look at each other. I'm like, we need to figure this out. So yeah, so at that point, we are now October of 2021, and I decide, let's do this. I reach out to my doctor. I'm like, okay, mentally, I feel ready. Physically, not so much, but I was like, mentally, I think I'm ready to do this. Let's make it happen. So we flew to New York again, and I had my second transfer October 11th of 2021. And I think going into that transfer, um, I was just very anxious. I was just very anxious. Like, is this going to work? I just want to know. Like, I wasn't as emotional going into it. I was just ready to know if this was going to work. Um, so of course we know that that one didn't work either. That one failed October 22nd. We got the not pregnant phone call again. Those phone calls that day. So it's like a 2 week, again, it's another 2 week waiting period of when you do the transfer to when you do a blood draw. So it's not like, you're waiting at home and you're able to take a pregnancy test and you find out at home on your own. Some girls during IVF do that. I just never did that because my doctor didn't recommend it, because at the end of the day, you're pumping yourself full of hormones. You're tricking your body into thinking that it's pregnant. So an at-home pregnancy test could give you a false positive.
Yeah.
So I never wanted to do that to myself, to my husband. So I was like, listen, I just rather know the facts. So once you're about that 12-day mark, it's anywhere from 10 to 12 days. You go to a lab, and you do like a blood draw. And that day is the worst. Like it's literally the worst day ever because you do these blood draws anywhere from like 7:30 to 8 o'clock in the morning, and you might not get the phone call until 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're literally sitting around
Yeah.
staring at your phone, waiting for this phone call. And the anxiety, the stress, and on top of it, my husband's trying to work from home. I'm pacing. I'm like, "Oh my god, it's 4 o'clock. They haven't called. I'm not pregnant." Like, I would literally tell him. I'm like, "It's 4 o'clock. They're not calling. It's not working. We need to do something." So, you would get that phone call, and again, it's just like you hang up from this "you're not pregnant" phone call. They tell you to stop all your meds immediately, and it's like you're back to, okay, so what now? Like literally, you just go back to your normal life. Like that's the craziness and the emotional roller coaster that is IVF, in my opinion. You are just supposed to hear the words, "You are not pregnant." That was a waste of your money. That was a waste of your time. And you have to move on to whatever you have planned for tomorrow, to go to work the next day. And that was really hard for me. That was very heavy. I would go to, if I would go to work and the next day I would see a girl roughly around my age with a baby, girl, she would be in the back crying. Like, there were triggers all day long. You know what I mean? It was, is that ever going to be me? Is that the life we're going to live? Are we going to be one of these couples that just never gets to have kids? What is that going to do to us? There were a lot of heavy conversations between me and Omar at that point. Were we going to be okay if this was never going to work for us? We knew we still had 2 embryos left, but at the same time, we knew that 2 had already failed. There was a big question that this might not really work. And, were we ever going to be okay with not being parents? And what does that look like for us? So those conversations, I think, were very heavy, but also very needed because it let me know, like, where he was, where I was, and what needed to happen. So I really, at that point, took a really long break from IVF. From IVF, the meds, the stress, the grief, you know, just everything. I was like, this is consuming our lives. We do not think about anything but IVF. We are living on an IVF clock and it has to stop. We literally just stopped. And I told him I need time to not think about the what if. I just wanted to live in the moment. I just, wanted to live our best Sarasota life. We had a boat at the time. We were, just trying to live as a married couple and see if this was going to be okay, that we were not going to have kids, and what was that going to look like. But at the same time, it was also still very hard and very triggering. I mean, at the time I had really young nieces, and it was very sad that I missed out on a lot of little birthday parties and things like that because I was just so triggered. Like, I could not attend a 5-year-old's birthday. I mean, I was literally melting down. Like, I could not do it. So I think within that year time off is when I really learned that if I'm going to continue to do this IVF journey, I'm going to have to really set some boundaries, not only with myself, but with my family, because they were not understanding that us hosting Christmas in our new house was very triggering. That we were not in visualizing celebrating Christmas with just the 2 of us. That was very difficult for me. That was really painful. And I think I took a break from social media as well because, it was hard for me to see my friends that were getting pregnant naturally, friends that I had that, they were getting to celebrate Mother's Day. They were getting to celebrate Father's Day, their kids' first day of school. Those things were so triggering for me. I could not function those days. Mother's Day, first day of school, Christmas, like, they were very triggering days for me. Something that is so simple that people just think we're going to celebrate this holiday as a family was so difficult for me. So I think that that's when my husband and I really sat down and figured out how we were gonna move forward with IVF and with the boundaries that we had set. We sat down with both of our families and let them know, "Hey, listen, like, this is what we're going through. This is how much we've spent. This is the financial stress that we are going through, physically, emotionally. This is what we're going through. We are gonna need a little space. We are gonna need, some understanding from everybody that this is not easy." And I think at that point, my mom kind of got it because I think she realized that I was really pulling back.
Yep.
And, I am not normally like that. I'm very outgoing, like very social. And it became a very dark place, even though I was trying to physically separate IVF from, let me just try to live a normal life. At the end of the day, I wanted to live a normal life, but IVF was never going to go away. That was something that was always there. I knew I wanted a baby. I knew I wanted a family, but I wasn't sure that I was ready to continue to go through this pain, this grief, the what if, the financial stress. It was a very um hard time, you can say, at that point.
Dude, I mean, seriously. And like, what a moment that you had. And, I think something that you're sharing, and I just want to say, like, thank you for sharing the realness of it because the triggering piece, especially on like social, is so real. And I think we like underestimate. I mean, I even think back to like sometimes that I thought I was trying to find information, but really all I found was reasons to feel bad about myself when like
Yes.
that's so like unnecessary. And you forget how powerful it is, especially when you are going through really tough times. It's like the last thing you need is like in your face stuff that you don't even know is coming your way or that you can process. So for you to like put up real boundaries, kudos to you. That's a really hard thing to do.
Because that's kind of what happens. Like, you
Yeah.
meet these IVF women, you kind of all start talking about, "Oh, I'm transferring this date, I'm transferring this date," and you all start talking about, what you're feeling during that 2-week wait period. Well, what happens when their transfer works and
Right.
mine didn't?
Right.
It gets
Right.
real quiet, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
what's going on in their life is completely different than what's going on in my life. They're sharing their pregnancy announcements, their gender reveals, and I'm over here like, well, I guess I should start thinking about my third transfer. The noise gets very quiet when a failed transfer happened. And for me, I think that that's when I realized I needed to take a step back because, yes, I was really meeting a lot of great women that were very supportive, but IVF was working for them. And they were sharing their baby bumps, they were sharing their ultrasounds, and that wasn't the life I was living. So that was way too hard for me to keep watching. I wanted to be your friend and we can kiki about the latest lip gloss, but at the end of the day, I'm not ready for you to tell me you're 23 weeks pregnant. You see what I'm saying? Like, it was way too triggering. So I think that that was all I really knew what to do. I was grateful I had met those girls and created this IVF community through social media, but at the same time, their life was moving in that direction and my life was not. I was staying in the same spot. My life was continuing to be put on hold. That's how I felt. I was not able to enjoy the success of IVF yet. I was questioning, is this going to work for me?
Okay, so you take a beat, you put up physical boundaries, you put up social boundaries, you guys are in it. So what does that next step look like? Like, did you give yourself a time frame, or were you just like, we're done until we feel ready? Like, what was that like?
Kind of, kind of.
Yeah.
I kind of just was like, let me take a moment, let me see when I'm mentally ready. And during that year that I took off, I was still in contact with my IVF doctor. I was still in contact with her team. They reach out to me every month and, they were super supportive. They understood why I took a break. Um, and during that time is when my IVF doctor, she had recommended maybe I kind of look into some other testing, as far as immune testing and, just to kind of see what was going on internally. So I was like, yeah, sure. Like, what's it going to hurt? Maybe there's something that was missed. Maybe this is something that could give us some answers. Sure, why not? I'm willing to do testing. I'm not willing to do a transfer. So at that time, she had recommended a doctor who was also in New York, New Jersey area. And I did like an immune kind of test with him. It was wild. They took like 47 vials of blood from me and they
Jeez.
literally tested every single like basically like cell in your body. It came back like inconclusive. There wasn't really anything that would indicate that this is why a transfer isn't working. So we were like, okay, sure. Like, thanks for the information, but it wasn't anything that was going to help us move forward as to why this wasn't working. Yeah, it was great to have that information. It was great to meet that doctor. Um, we'll circle back to him. It was great to meet him. It was great to, um, learn more about what happens through IVF with your body, things like that. He was great as far as educating us. Um, so once we did that, we kind of realized, okay, at this point, let's just do another transfer and just kind of like see what happens. Like we went into the third transfer, I think kind of a little bit more open-minded. Does that make sense? So within that time frame, was still doing more testing, not only the immune testing, but I did more like uterine testing, things like that. I did like a histo. They really go in, they look at the uterus, see if it's misshapen, anything that could be questioned, I tested for it. If there was an IVF test, I did it. I didn't care if it was pointless, if it was expensive, if it was gonna give us an answer or not. I went into this third transfer with every T crossed and I dotted, girl. I was like, I am not going to question one more thing.
Right.
So, kind of within that group of testing that I did, it was around like 7 months total of like testing that I had ended up doing. We found out that I had silent endometriosis. At the time, my IVF doctor was like, "Hey, listen, like this is a very, mild thing. Women get pregnant with endometriosis all the time. It's not really something that you should stress. You have two options. You can move forward with an IVF, or I mean, an endometriosis surgery, which is very intense. And she's like, you're not really there. It's not something that you should really consider at this point. So we were like, okay, great. There's this drug out there that we can recommend for you to do, which is called Lupron, and all it does is kind of like shut your whole hormones down, and you just kind of like start over again. Basically, it like puts you into menopause at 36 or however old I was at the time. Biggest mistake I ever made. Any IVF ladies out there listening, if your doctor tells you to do Lupron, red flag. So I decided to do the Lupron. Basically what it does is kind of like suppresses your body, suppresses your hormones. It kind of like minimizes the endometriosis, basically. So I did that for 3 months. It's a shot you do once a month. Each shot got worse. As you do the 3 shots, the symptoms get more and more intense. So it was not ideal. She was having the hot flashes. She was having the muscle aches. She was having the hot flashes at night, girl. She could not sleep. It was so effing hot. Okay. Like it was in the middle of summer. She was literally dying. Okay. I
Oh
was
my
walking around with
God.
one of those neck fans. I'm not joking. Like it was horrendous.
Wow.
So, it kind of takes a little bit of time for your body to start back up, if that makes sense. So they shut your body down, and then your period essentially like starts completely over, like as if it's like your first period. And then they kind of go off of that. In hopes that it kind of suppressed the endometriosis enough. So I did that transfer November 15th. So it was, kind of right around that Thanksgiving holiday time. We had let our families know that we were not going to be doing Thanksgiving with anybody, that, this was our 3rd transfer. It was kind of coming down to the wire, that we just wanted some space and we would share with them when we felt comfortable, which at that point is what I started sharing on social media as well, because I didn't want people reaching out to me,
Asking.
I
Right.
didn't want people
Yeah.
asking. I was ready to kind of let myself process first. And then once I felt comfortable to share how I was feeling and what was going on, then that's whenever I would share on social media and with our families. So that one failed November 30th. So essentially right for Thanksgiving. Hopefully I do not start crying. But I think that this is when I really like became numb. I really thought that there was no help for me. I felt like I was not going to be a mom. Like I had to accept that I was one of those. IVF didn't work for me. IVF isn't going to work for me. Being a mom wasn't a reality for me. And that was one of the hardest Christmas, New Year's, the whole thing I had ever in my whole entire life experienced. I think I was just so broken that I didn't know like how to feel. Like I was so numb. I was so disappointed. I was so hurt. I was so frustrated. And I knew it was time for me to really accept that this was my reality, that I had done everything in my power. There were no more tests for me to do. They were out of tests. There were there was nothing, there were no more medications they could give me. There were no more, you know, let's try this. There, like that was it. So I think that's when the first time I had really experienced like depression. And I think my husband saw it. I think he realized she is not the same person. She is not okay. Like I think this is something that he wasn't able to fix. He knew that there was nothing he could say, nothing he could do, nothing anybody could do that was going to make this better for me. And it was very hard for both of us, but I think he knew that my level of grief at that point was something he had never seen before. Yeah, that one, I mean, the third one was 100% the hardest. That one was the hardest. We really didn't celebrate Christmas. We didn't celebrate New Year's. We didn't really even celebrate Thanksgiving. Like it was, she was very hard. And I think my husband knew deep down that as hurt as what I wasn't going to give up easily. I knew we had one more embryo, but I wasn't ready. And I wasn't ready to hear you just have unexplained infertility. I was done hearing we don't know why
right. Yeah.
We don't know why this isn't working for you. I was done hearing that. I literally told my doctor, I said, I'm not going to have another phone call of you telling me why this isn't, you don't know why this isn't working for me. Like, I became very mad. I became very like pissed off. Like I was beyond frustrated. You know, we had spent our life savings to do IVF. I have poured every ounce of my being into this process. And the only answer I'm getting is, well, we just need to learn from another transfer. No, that's not going to work for me. That answer is no longer working for me. So, and I think my husband knew that. Like, I think he knew I was at my breaking point with that doctor. Like, again, it's not the doctor's fault. I get it. She had done her part. She had got me to a point of being able to retrieve amazing embryo or eggs, and we fertilized amazing embryos. That was her job. I get that. But my level of anger was it was undescribable. I was now going at IVF mad. I was mad. So at that point, my husband honestly kind of took it upon himself to reach out to that doctor that we did the immunology test with. His name was Dr. Vidali. So when we did that immune testing, my husband loved that doctor. Like
it was vibing because
it was a male. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like maybe because it was a male doctor. I don't know, girl. But he just said, listen, like he's the vibe. He gets it. He was, excuse my language, he was a non-bullshitter. Like Dr. Vidali gave you the facts. He was not here to sugarcoat. He was not going to tell you what you wanted to hear. He was like, this is what needs to happen. So I think maybe that's why my husband reached out to him, because he felt that I needed to hear that. He felt like I needed that type of directness because I was so upset, that he reached out to him and let him know our scenario. We did a consultation with him over the phone, I think it was. And he was like, "Oh no, you need to come to New Jersey." He's like, "You have endometriosis. This is not an embryo issue. This is not a uterus issue. You have endometriosis. You need to come to New Jersey and have the surgery." And I was like, "What the hell?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I didn't at that time really know a lot about the endometriosis surgery, what endometriosis was, why this surgery was necessary. I had heard, that this surgery could have long-term complications, that this was gonna be a lot more of an intense journey than what I had ever done before, and so I was not really that sold yet, if that makes sense, until I met with him in person. When I flew to New Jersey, at Hoboken Hospital, and I had an in-person consultation with him, and he was amazing. He sat us down, and it was, like, probably, like, over an hour. We talked to him, and he went over all of my, records and transfers and the meds I was on and what I had done at this point, and he flat out told me, he was like, "There is no reason that you should not transfer this perfectly graded embryo that you have left."
Wow.
He said, "You need to have this surgery and you are going to transfer right away. And I promise you this will work for you." And I was like, "Okay, girl." Like,
Yeah.
it hasn't worked before in the past. Like, again, wasn't really sold. Yeah. So we kind of started Googling what the surgery was and what it entailed. His staff started reaching out to us that he was very interested in our case and wanted to take us right away. Typically, his wait list is anywhere from 10 months to a year. So we didn't really think that it was going to happen anytime soon. I was like, "Oh, okay. So I'm going to be in limbo again for another year." So I just started like slowly like researching what the surgery was and um you know what the scarring was going to look like that I was really concerned about because I was like, "Listen, am I about to go through this super intense surgery and this not work for me and then I'm scarred for life?" I'm like,
Totally.
that's going to be that's going to be a trigger I'm going to have for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Like, that's a hard no for me.
Right.
So I wasn't totally sold. I had met I think I had done like a FaceTime. Yeah, it was like a FaceTime with one of his patients that I had met on social media. And her and I talked, and she was like, "Listen, it's like anything else with IVF. It's super scary going into it, but she did get pregnant. She ended up getting pregnant. So I think she gave me a little hope. And I think in my mind, I was like, well, what do I have to lose at this point? Yes, I have endometriosis. We know that. Why not at least handle that? Whether or not it gets me pregnant or not, at least I know that that's handled." So I was kind of going into the surgery that this surgery wasn't going to get me pregnant. This is just going to give me a healthier life. Like, that's how I kind of approached it. I didn't think I'm doing this because this is what's going to get me pregnant. So after he reached out and he was like, "Oh no, I'm going to do your surgery right away." And I was like, "What the hell is happening?" I was like, "I thought we were on like a waiting list."
Right.
And he wanted to take me right away. So I did the surgery February 24th in New Jersey.
What year is this?
Sideline.
2023.
This was 2023.
Yeah.
Um, I was super nervous going into the surgery because it was the most intense thing I had done at that up until that point.
Right.
So I was very nervous, but at the same time, I knew I needed to do it. He wanted to take me. He obviously knew he could help me.
Yeah.
So going into the surgery, I was nervous. It was when I came out that I was like, whoa, this is major. I had a major like negative response to the anesthesia, just like throwing up everywhere. I was in the hospital for a day. It was
Oh
a disaster.
no.
So I was like, okay, here we are again. Like, I've done something so intense, so aggressive. I'm feeling awful. Couldn't walk, was in a wheelchair, girl. Can you imagine in
My
New Jersey?
God.
It's snowing. It's snowing.
Unacceptable.
I have to get in this cab. I have to get in this
Ah.
cab, go back to a hotel. Poor my husband is like trying to find a wheelchair to get me to the hotel room because I was unable to
My
walk. Just
God.
like a mess, girl, a mess. So you're really not able to like walk very much the first couple days. So we had to kind of like write it out in the hotel. I think it was for like 4 days, 4 or 5 days, something like that. Before I could like,
Still, that's
yeah,
insane.
yeah, to like get on a plane because of the pressure in the plane. I was so bloated. You know, you essentially have like internal stitching. Um, and he did end up removing endometriosis in 3 areas. I had it on left ovary, bladder, and colon. So it ended up being stage 3 endometriosis. It's 4 stages. Yeah, even though it was silent, meaning I didn't have like these crazy symptoms. Like
Right.
I didn't have these horrendous periods. I wasn't in a lot of pain. You know, I didn't have cycles that were lasting 7, 8, 9 days. I had a cycle that lasted 2 days, which should have been a red flag, but that's neither here nor there. Um, so I really didn't think that he was going to get in there and find a lot of endometriosis. We were very wrong. He called us when we got back to Sarasota and he was like, this is what I found. This is how intense it was. This was definitely why you're not getting pregnant. So at that point, he kind of started taking over a lot of the med side of my transfer. So at that point, he let me know, listen, you have to transfer right away. He's like, like, even if you're not 100% healed, you have to transfer right away because at the end of the day, the endometriosis can come back. So I was like, oh, like I thought this was going to be a situation where I had the surgery and I had time to heal a little bit and then I would transfer, you know, maybe like a couple months or whatever. So he started taking over whatever meds I needed to take for my transfer. He started giving them. He was the one recommending for me to take them. My IVF doctor, I know this sounds wild, she kind of took a back seat. So my surgeon, Dr. Vidali, was now kind of running the transfer. I was doing blood draws every 3 days, and he would tell me, he would get the results of my blood draw all the way in New Jersey, and he would be like, no, we have to up this. We need to downscale this. He was really taking control. And it was the first time that I realized that my meds were being adjusted every 3 days versus my other transfers. Like that had never happened my other transfers. So I was like, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit more positive that this looks differently. Whether it's going to happen, whether it's going to be good or bad, I knew it was a change.
Yeah.
So, and two, for my last transfer, my fourth transfer, I was on a lot more meds. So I was on a thyroid. She was on a steroid. It was a lot. It was the most medicated, heavy transfer I had done up until that point. Yeah. So that was kind of also adding another layer to the intensity of this final transfer.
Yeah, yeah.
So my final transfer was okay, so my surgery was February 24th, and then I transferred April 13th. So again, my surgeon that had done the surgery was kind of overseeing everything up until that point. So even the day I did my transfer, I think that they did a blood draw right before I got there. He got those results and he was like, let's make it happen. So, February or April 13th was my transfer. Last embryo, he was my weakest embryo. Last embryo, last transfer. At this point, we were tapped out. I knew at this point, if this transfer didn't work, we were done. We were calling it. Like, I told my IVF doctor, you know, thank you so much for everything. It was great to meet you, but I'm done. I won't be coming back to New York. She's done. Like, financially, there was nothing else we could do, you know.
Gosh.
I mean, again, like, we financially had no more money left. You know, the surgery wasn't 100% covered either. It was like 10 grand out of pocket that we had to come up with. So we just felt like, listen, like, we have no more money. What's the point of doing another IVF cycle? It hasn't worked up until this point. This is our last chance. This is our end all be all. If it doesn't work, we had accepted that there was nothing else I could do. I felt that I was at a place of peace, that if this didn't work for me, I knew in my heart that I did everything I could. Not only for myself, for my husband, for our families. There was nothing else I could give. There was nothing else I could give. There was nothing else I could do. There was nothing else I could give. I was done. I had lived in this IVF trance for 5 years. Like, I was done. Like,
Yeah.
I was ready to move on with my life. So transferred April 13th and got my very first "You are pregnant" phone call on April 22nd.
No way.
So, yes. So that was the first. I mean, honestly, I was in denial. Like,
I was just gonna
even when
say,
they
how did it feel? Because that has to be insane.
even when they told me, I think I was just in such denial. I mean, I couldn't even like, I literally lost it, like,
Yeah.
just sobbing completely. I also didn't really feel any symptoms within that waiting period. You know, a lot of women, they do say that they start to
Mhm.
feel some symptoms. I never did. Again, it could have been because I was healing from the surgery. I was on an insane amount of meds. Maybe all of that combined, I wasn't able to feel anything. So I think I was just in such denial that even hearing "you are pregnant," I think I couldn't really even celebrate until I guess I heard the heartbeat, if that makes sense, because I was just in such denial. Um, but it became very real, for my husband right away. I think the second he heard that phone call, he was all in. Like, his life changed right then. Um, I think because I had been going through so much physically, I wasn't there yet, if that makes sense. As exciting as what it was to hear that, and oh my god, it had finally worked. Um, I didn't get this, like, huge celebration excitement until much later than what he did. So, um, yeah, our life changed over a phone call is what I say. I mean, we heard so many no's throughout this process. When you finally hear a yes, it's almost hard to accept it, if that makes sense. That this was working, that this wasn't a complete waste of our time, this wasn't a complete waste of our money, you know, this was all now worth it. So, again, it took me some time to get there, but it was so amazing to be able to finally feel that.
Dude, that is incredible. So,
Thank you.
when did you get to celebrate, and how was, like, the follow-up? Did you have to stay in contact with him? What was, like, happening?
So, yeah, so I stayed on all my IVF medication until about 15 weeks. So I stayed in contact with both doctors, my IVF doctor and the surgeon, up until that point. They actually don't medically release you from your IVF doctor until about 10 weeks. And then that's when they turn you over to an OBGYN or an OB. So I was really under their care. Yes, I was going and getting ultrasounds and getting blood. I think, like when you first get pregnant naturally, I think maybe you do like maybe one blood draw. I was doing like blood draws every like 3 to 4 days just
Gosh.
because they're making sure that the pregnancy is continuing to move forward.
Right.
Like I said, I stayed on my meds. So they were both kind of in works with, when I could slowly come off the meds. So it was also that was kind of very scary too. I was terrified that when I stopped all these meds cold turkey, like, what if the pregnancy doesn't go to full term? Like, because in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm on all these meds and that's what's working. So why stop them? So it's a lot of anxiety and it's a lot of just uncomfortable. Like you're very uncomfortable at the very beginning because even whenever I found my OB, she was very new to somebody. I was her first, she was a very young delivery doctor. So I was her first IVF patient.
Yes.
So that made me even more anxious. So having to go and explain to her all the meds I was on, when I was going to be coming off of them. It was essentially like all three doctors were kind of working together. So that was also very intense. Um, but I would say I think when I heard the first heartbeat, um, it became very real to me. I think that was the first little breath I was able to take because I knew I was so grateful that I had made it to that point, and I just took every ultrasound and doctor's appointment and, high risk doctor's appointment. I took each one at a time because I knew that I was such a high risk individual being pregnant that I just wanted to make it to the next appointment. That's what I would tell myself, as long as I can make it to the next appointment. But yeah, the whole pregnancy was very I was very anxious. I was on the anxiety medication. She was on the blood pressure medication. She was on it all, girl.
Yeah. How was pregnancy then for you? Was it
Ah,
hard on your body? Yeah, how did you were you so tired? Like, how did you feel?
it was awful. Like, I
Yeah,
hate telling this part because, like, I
I
was
know.
so grateful and I didn't care that I felt like shit. I really didn't. Like, um, it was rough. It was rough because I was on the medication for so long. Um, it was almost like my body was coming off of the meds and then on top of it being newly pregnant too. So it was pretty rough. I was so sick. Like I was like I pretty much like threw up until like 32 weeks and I had him at 37 weeks. So it was not like this enjoyable pregnancy and like I was just, it wasn't one of those, but I didn't really care. Like I was just like, I'm pregnant. I'm doing the best that I can every single day. And I was so grateful that my body was finally working for me. Does that make sense? Because for so long, I had felt like my body was failing me, that I wasn't able to get pregnant. And now that I was, I didn't care how I felt. I really physically, I didn't care. I would just like lay in bed and throw up and be like, well, at least I'm pregnant. Like this is happening and I don't really care.
Oh my God.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, one, I just want to say I'm like living in this story with you. You're pregnant. It's feeling amazing. You give birth at 37 weeks. Did he come naturally or were you induced early? What was the whole thing for his birth?
No, so I had a scheduled induction just because he was IVF. My age, your age and IVF, you already are considered high risk, basically.
Okay.
Um, so I was induced at the 37 weeks because he was IVF. He was already fully developed. So like when they transfer the embryo, you're already kind of so far along. Your body's just kind of playing catch up. So he was like fully like ready to go at 37 weeks and they
Sure.
wanted to go ahead and take him too because also I was so high risk with the high blood pressure, preeclampsia, all of that was kind of going to start coming into play. So they wanted to go ahead and make sure that that wasn't going to be an issue for me. So I was induced at 37 weeks. They wanted to kind of see what was able to do naturally, but because of the blood pressure issues, it was kind of all over the place during labor, girl. Um, I think I labored for like 26 hours or something like that. And yeah, it was a joke. It was a joke. And then his heart rate started going a little crazy and they just decided to do C-section at that point.
Yeah.
So I didn't go into labor and delivery thinking I was going to have this like easy breezy delivery. Girl, it was a journey from start to finish. So I was totally accepting if it was going to be a C-section. I was not scared of it. I was aware that that was probably what was going to be happening. So I just was like, let's do it.
Yeah.
That was my mentality going into it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. How was it meeting him for the first time?
That was, I think I stayed so anxious during the whole pregnancy. A lot of the time I was in like such denial that this was even happening. You hear no for so many years. I was always waiting for like the ball to drop. Like they were even wheeling me back there to do my C-section and I'm like, well, I really hope this goes well, but at the same time, like I'm just trying to keep myself calm. Like you just
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah.
I think seeing him and hearing him was when it happened for me. Was when I realized this is real. It has happened. I knew at that point that he was our miracle. I knew, sorry. I knew my life was changed forever. And As hard as it was to get to him, it was something I would do over and over again because he changed my life in so many ways.
Yeah.
I was at such a dark place and I was losing myself so much because I was in this crazy IVF trance. It's like literally like what I tell people it is. Like literally, like that's what it is. This emotional roller coaster that I was on put me at such a place that I didn't really even know who I was. And when I held him for the first time, that's when I knew this is what I was meant to do. This is why I did this. This is the feeling I wanted to have. This is the unconditional love that no one could ever take away from me. I knew that he was the miracle that I needed to put me back together.
It's so beautiful. And it's so beautiful and so special.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
he is truly like a walking angel.
He is.
He literally is.
I know he doesn't look like it when he's outside running these streets, but
He
but he
is
really is.
so cute. Yeah. Okay. I thank you for sharing everything. Thank you
Of
for
course,
walking us through this.
of course, I wanted to share my story. I want to be able to share my story because, like we talked about before, I know that there are so many women out there afraid to share their story, whether it's religious reasons or shame or whatever it may be. But, you're not alone in this journey. And yes, it's very scary. And there are so many unknowns and it's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. But at the same time, there are so many women who are going through this, and it should be talked about because you should not be facing this alone. Honestly, you can't do it alone. You can't. If you do not have some type of support system going through IVF, you will not make it alone. You won't because what it takes from you is something you'll never experience. And the mental, the physical, the emotional, it's not something that you will ever understand unless you have gone through it. The first advice I would say is you have to 100% find your support system, whether that's your partner, that's your best friend, that's homegirl on Instagram. You see what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't matter who it is. You have to find that person that is going to support you through the good and the bad. I also think finding a doctor that you 100% can trust. You do not want to feel like a number. You do not want to feel like you are a paycheck to that doctor. You want to feel like you're heard. You are able to advocate for yourself, being able to say, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable with that. Let's revisit another X, Y, and Z. You have to be able to stand up to these doctors. Yes, they are doctors. They do know what's best, but you know yourself. You know yourself. And if you don't feel like like you're comfortable doing that, you have to say that. That's what you're paying these doctors for. So that was huge for me. I didn't learn that until closer to the end of my journey. And you can't be afraid to say, like, this is too much. Like, this is too much. I need a break. You have to be able to set your boundaries, whether that's setting boundaries with your family, social media, whatever it may be, you have to find those boundaries that are whatever's triggering you, and then that's what you have to set your boundaries on. Once you find that, I feel like that was a major game changer for me. Thank you. Thanks for letting me share my story. Thank you. Yes, it was a journey, but we're here now. So, and I'm just thank you so much for letting me, share my story. And I hope, like I keep saying, I really hope it touches at least just one person, even if it's just one.
Thanks for listening to It's a Circus Podcast. If today's episode made you feel a little less alone, share it with a friend who might need it too. We are building something special at the Turner Brothers Circus, a space for women in transition to find connection, laughter, and support as they navigate motherhood, identity, and taking care of themselves along the way. I'd love for you to be a part of it. Remember, you're doing better than you think. Stay grounded, stay real, and embrace that beautiful mess. And as always, the show must go on. Until next time.